As a result of the potential influence of climate change and increasing human demand, misuse, and consumption, the shortage of clean water will be the next environmental crisis. Drinking water contamination and subsequent inquiries into the Walkerton, Ontario, and North Battleford, Saskatchewan tragedies fueled public mistrust in the safety of our water supply. Recent drought conditions on Canada's prairies and the serious wildfires that have burned across the country have heightened people's awareness to the fact that water supplies cannot be taken for granted. These dramatic events have been a wake-up call for all of us. One of the most significant concerns to the scientific community is the loss of up to 70% of Canada's wetlands. Yet wetlands are the world's most productive ecosystems. They work as natural water filters that remove as much as 90% of common pollutants from fresh water. They are an intricate part of an ecological process that has evolved over thousands of years after the last North American ice age. Not only do they work as purifying agents, they provide homes for thousands of wildlife species, all of who need water to live, just like us. But are we protecting them?
Wetlands in Canada and actually in North America have suffered great losses in the last century. Canada overall has lost about 70% of their wetlands, and the prairie provinces have lost over 70% of their wetlands. And this loss has great importance to the water cycle because wetlands supply and receive and hold and change water as it flows into our lakes and rivers. So with the loss of these wetlands, we no longer have the filtering in terms of the water quality and no longer have the supply in terms of our water quantity.
Wetlands, rivers, lakes, glacier runoff, and aquifers are sources of the fresh water supply renewed by the cycles of snowfall and rain. Throughout evolution, there has been constant change. Many species on Earth have adapted to these changes by adjusting their behavior, biology, and ecological patterns in order to survive. Recently, human disturbance on the landscape has caused additional pressure.
We anticipate that the waterfowl are going to move north. They're going to go where there's more water, and that is in the boreal zone. This boreal zone now, though, is under increasing threat from industry. All of these activities then disturb the wetlands, change the hydrology, and so the whole question that we have for the future century is how are we going to conserve our boreal wetlands?
Mountain glaciers and mountain snow supply fresh water to more than 50% of the world's population. Scientists estimate that glaciers are losing 92 cubic kilometers of ice each year.
In Canada, we have a large percent, 10% of the available fresh waters. But that's kind of a myth because the water is really available in the north and the people are mostly in the south. So we're really in much more of a crisis than we actually think we are because of where our water is and where our people are.
In the Canadian Rockies, temperatures have risen nearly 3 times the global average over the past century and are now 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer. This small increase may not sound like much, but it creates a devastating effect on a finely tuned ecosystem.
One of the consequences of climate warming is that we see glaciers melting up and down the whole backbone of the Rockies. Everyone in Alberta, I think, has seen the Athabasca Glacier, which has receded 1.5 kilometers in the past 100 years. What most people don't think of is that the midsummer flows in prairie rivers are maintained by those glaciers. By July, the snowpacks that drive the water cycle in the early part of the season are long gone. And it's the melting of those glaciers that supply water to rivers like the Bow and the North Saskatchewan and the Athabasca. So once those glaciers are gone, the river flows are going to be mere trickles.
Many communities depend on lakes for their water supply, including the Great Lakes that we share with our neighbor, the United States. Most of our urban supply comes from rivers that are directly linked to precipitation. Wherever it comes from, it cannot be taken for granted. Water is precious and must be protected for present and future needs.
As a rule of thumb, the prairies at about this latitude have warmed by about 2.5 degrees since record started being kept. And of course, an increase in temperature means higher evaporation. So that evaporation is removing water invisibly from the landscape, aggravating the sorts of droughts that we've historically had on the prairies. So I think it's fair to say that we can expect drought to intensify in the years ahead. It's difficult to say just when. I think what we'll see is a number of things colliding: increasing temperatures as a result of climate warming, increasing human populations and agriculture, and normal drought cycles. Of course, it's the latter that we have difficulty in predicting, but when those three happen at the same time, we're going to have a major water crisis on our hands.
We have also learned how to harness the power of water and transform it into electricity, irrigation systems, and other applications that sustain Canada's quality of life. Some say that natural world values are adversely affected with the construction of dams, reservoirs, and water diversions. In some cases, this may be true. However, in Canada, some flooding through damming creates additional water supplies that would normally flow into oceans. In Canada, we have many important conservation initiatives that help protect critical habitats and promote public awareness through school-based education programs and the support of countless hours of volunteer work. These initiatives have helped raise awareness toward the protection and conservation of Canada's wetland treasures. One of these nonprofit organizations is Ducks Unlimited Canada. Since starting up in the prairies more than 65 years ago, DUC has conserved, restored, and managed more than 6,500 wetland projects across Canada. Ducks Unlimited Canada's wetland conservation expertise has led to their inclusion in a number of key conservation initiatives, such as the federal government's agricultural policy framework to help the natural environment.
Wetlands serve many important functions. Wildlife are the obvious ones that immediately interest me as a biologist, and Ducks Unlimited is an organization, but we're very aware of the many functions that wetlands serve. Wetlands are a critical component to healthy watersheds, and healthy watersheds are our best solution to an assured supply of water and quality of water, whether it's drinking or whether it's for agricultural purposes or others. And they also serve important functions in a watershed for stormwater and also are sources for water supply. A lot of wetland areas, especially in morainal areas where there is gravel substrate, a lot of that water goes from wetlands over time down into the substrate and recharges aquifers. So many important functions, and some of them obvious, like wildlife, some of them less obvious, but the common denominator as people is they hold water, and we require water to live.
Ducks Unlimited Canada is also partnering with various forestry companies to help protect critical boreal wetlands. Canada's vast green forest belt contains more than 1/4 of the world's boreal forests, with 30% comprised of wetlands and water. In fact, Canada's boreal forest holds more fresh water in wetlands and lakes than any place on Earth. The boreal forest is home to key breeding, staging, and molting areas used by tens of millions of migratory waterfowl, 100 million shorebirds, and some 3 billion land birds, in addition to critical habitat to deer, wolves, woodland caribou, moose, and other creatures that share the landscape. To help accommodate these natural world needs, Canada's main forest industry association, called FPAC, has joined forces with various conservation groups.
Especially in recent years, the Canadian forest industry has been very good at working collaboratively with the conservation community and different environmental groups. Together, we've jointly sponsored research, and then we've incorporated the results of that research into our forest practices. To give you an example, companies have recently provided information on what they do to Ducks Unlimited for a review of forestry best practices so that we can look at what's being done, what should be done, and pick the best in the industry and replicate that across.
FPAC is unique in the world because it requires all of its members to have their forest practices certified by third-party scrutiny, including practices that relate directly to water and watershed protection. However, the boreal forest is under pressure, such as oil and gas development, mining and forestry, as a result of an increasing worldwide demand for natural resources.
Protecting water is a fundamental prerequisite to carrying out any forestry activities, just as the reforestation of a harvested area is a prerequisite to doing business. And many forest companies in Canada have changed their practices greatly over the past years to better protect water, the wetlands, the rivers, the streams, and also the fish and the wildlife that use those areas. There are also government regulations and policies in place to protect water, which companies follow. And those are put in place to prevent erosion into streams and also to ensure that the habitat needs of the fish and the animals that use the water's edge are met. And in most places it involves leaving a buffer of unharvested areas around significant waterways.
How important is water to our forests?
Well, of course, water is an essential component of forests. It's one of the things that make up a forest, along with the wildlife, the plants, and the trees. And generally, as a rule of thumb, the forest industry doesn't harvest in the wetland areas. However, the forestry activities in the neighboring upland areas can impact on the wetlands. And so, as part of the conservation of wetlands, the forest industry has to be actively involved.
Other environmental initiatives by companies operating in the forest include better protection of large watershed basins and other water values. In locations where we do harvest, new trees are planted, and regeneration plays an important role in protecting the rivers, streams, and wetlands found in the forest. Water is also an essential part of regrowth, and in times of drought on the prairies, Canada's boreal wetlands also offer relief for waterfowl that have historically depended on prairie wetlands. But the key is not only the health of the waterway, but the habitat surrounding it. The survival of all life on Earth depends on water. Humans can only live 4 days without water. Beyond our human needs, a healthy water supply is key to the sustainability of nature's flora and fauna and is an absolute requirement for everyone's economic well-being. Across Canada, the quality and quantity of water varies from province to province and from territory to territory. However, are Canadians doing a good job at managing this resource?
It should be noted that there's a tremendous amount of knowledge, understanding, and research being done in Canada with respect to water. In many ways, this country is a leader in what we know about water and how it can be managed.
I think one of the most important aspects to consider when looking at drinking water is that its effect that it can have on public health. I think it's very important to gather all the resources that are out there and work cooperatively in trying to solve some of these issues that we're dealing with.
Besides establishing cooperative working relationships, are there new technologies that utilities could adopt to help protect public health?
Well, there's not necessarily a technology out there that's good for every application. What we tend to use, though, is a concept of what we call multi-barrier approach to treating the water. And I think what's very important in that is that starts with the raw water quality that you're dealing with. So we consider our very first barrier is stewardship in our watershed. And an important thing is we're not relying just on one barrier. Then once we get in the treatment plant, we tend to use a number of different barriers. So for example, for disinfection, we use both chlorine and we use UV disinfection. And so if there's a failure or a difficulty with any one barrier, you always have backups there. Ultraviolet disinfection is really one of the newest breakthroughs in the drinking water treatment area. Very effective against organisms that we have a lot of difficulty in actually treating in the system. And these are things like Giardia, which causes beaver fever, or this Cryptosporidium, which conventional treatment techniques are not really effective at. The beauty of UV is it removes up to 1,000 times these organisms that are there. And it's easy to operate, which is really important, I think, for small communities. We put UV in E.L. Smith this last year, and it was actually the largest installation in the world at that time. But now it's being applied to very small communities and then very large communities. So we're actually working with New York City, who is in the process of actually building a UV facility. In smaller communities in Canada, I think the one thing we got to remember is that the technology and the knowledge to operate a treatment plant really is independent of the size. It's really dependent on the raw water quality that you're starting with. So the biggest challenge for these small communities is that they really have to operate almost the same level as we're operating here, where we're serving 1 million people and have a lot of resources.
Modern technology now provides water managers the opportunity to remotely monitor water quality online. This is of particular interest and value to smaller communities who have the same water quality needs as larger cities, but don't necessarily have the resources for around-the-clock monitoring at their local treatment facilities.
So one of the things that we've done to address many of the issues in small communities is we've actually linked these small communities to our main control room, bring real-time data back from these facilities, and can monitor the quality of the water on a real-time basis. And if any issues occur, then we can react instantaneously to fix those.
Remote monitoring provides consumers with the comfort of knowing that their drinking water is safe at all times.
We have some of the best utilities in the world, and plants and technologies. But on the other hand, we have in many small locations significant issues that need to be addressed.
It's interesting to observe how Canadians have responded to the notion of water quality, especially after crises like Walkerton. It's fascinating to observe that while we spend millions of dollars ensuring that the water that comes out of our taps is completely safe to drink, the Canadians will spend more than they do per liter on gasoline to buy bottled water that is no more pure or has no higher quality than what comes out of the taps in most of our communities.
Canadians have been strongly reminded that they cannot take our water supply for granted.
Canadians do take our water for granted. We have excellent water resources in this country, and we've come to presume that it's free, that we don't have to invest in it. We have to recognize that water is one of the most valuable commodities that we have. That means we should take an interest in what our governments do to protect our water resources. We should take an interest in what our water utilities do, and we should insist on high quality.
Historically, Canadians have enjoyed a generous supply of quality drinking water at a very low cost. However, we may have to pay more to secure our future needs.
Well, I think we've got awareness that we've got vulnerability. That's probably the main thing that's happened in the 3 years since Walkerton. Our water supply is very safe if we implement the things that we know how to do. The major problems, as happened in Walkerton, was simply failing to do what we know how to do.
Is our concern for water quality just for humans? What about the needs of the natural world?
Nature allows us to live our lives, and we have to maintain the quality of what we expose wildlife and other natural critters to. The water that we have stewardship over is not just for people to drink. All living things require water.
This year, Alberta Environment is launching a major conservation initiative entitled Water for Life. The strategy outlines practical and effective approaches to managing the province's present and future water needs.
Drinking water across Canada is generally safe. Alberta has adopted the Canadian Drinking Water Quality Standards as either legislation or regulation. And as new standards develop, we in Alberta will accept them. But the issue is larger than just drinking water. And unfortunately, when you talk about a water strategy, people think drinking water. But it has to be much larger than that. It has to include water for industrial use, water for agricultural use, water to protect the riparian environment. We have to protect the environmental integrity as well when we're talking about a water strategy. Water is an emotional issue. It's difficult to convince people when they have their emotions involved. So it's important that people be prepared and open-minded to listen to the facts, to be able to listen to the science. Whether it agrees with them or not, at least consider the science before they make a decision. I think all of us as consumers of water have to be aware that when we use water, somebody else downstream from us is going to use the same water. I think we all have to be made aware of that so that we use water responsibly and that we treat it in a fashion that it is clean and healthy when it ends up downstream. Well, I think water is not only an emergency issue in one sense, but also a future issue. I don't believe it's just an Alberta issue. I believe it's a significant issue right across the country. I believe water is the issue of the 21st century.
By having Canadians refocus on the importance of water to their way of life, we're learning a great deal about how our culture works and how it has changed over the last century. In a number of communities, we have been able to encourage locals to rethink their relationship to the river. And what they have discovered is that over the last few generations, our rivers have become backyards, places where we store what we don't want and what we want to hide. And many communities are trying to make their rivers their front yards again, to restore water to their consciousness and also to make rivers part of their communities and sense of place.
What we have learned as a nation about the quality and quantity of our water is a wake-up call for all of us. The loss of wetlands, tainted water outbreaks, drought on the prairies, and wildfires across the country may help us recognize the importance of conservation before it's too late. As citizens, we have the right to know and understand what we have lost, what we can protect, and what is at risk to our health and well-being with respect to our precious water supply. So Canada, get involved. Be a volunteer. Ask questions about your drinking water and help protect our most valued resource, fresh water.